I'm going to talk to you about building apps with style. I mean, it's one thing to have a functional app, but you want to make it look cool. And of course, you want to make the experience for the user intuitive, which is real important. So I'm going to cover these topics, and we're going to jump back and forth between charts. We're going to take a look at some examples which were sent on to you, and we'll take a look at some other examples as well, and we'll dig into them and explain all the nuts and bolts. All right, so we'll look at the style editor. I'm going to briefly talk about fonts, documented classes, so documented CSS classes, a topic of custom classes, and then we're going to get into a little bit of JavaScript to build on this session earlier on JavaScript. We're going to talk about how you can use JavaScript with CSS. And I'm going to combine some JavaScript that is able to show and hide things with CSS and get into this topic of navigation. When you start building applications, chances are you want to show the user a sequence of panels or pages. You don't want to put everything on one big long roll and have them scroll down forever. So how do you build an application that looks cool, that lets them select what they need to focus on and go to it? So navigation is something that it can be a little bit tricky, but you can do some cool things. I'm going to get into that, and there's a lot of learnings that I have that I'm going to share with you on that. And we'll talk a little bit about dynamically setting so web settings, and you can see some other things there too, right? And they may not all be in that order, right? So the style editor, when you want to style your app, this is probably the first place you want to go because it's the easiest way to add some styles. Right, so let's go over to Domino Vault, and let's just say new application. And of course, I can put in text and then go ahead and say that this is heading 1. One thing I will point out while I'm in the text editor is you can actually click on the source. So if you want to put inline styles in here, you can. Or if you have some markup you want to put it in here, you can do that as well. But the whole idea with the rich text editor is that it makes it easy to style because it's a rich text editor. And then we'll just put a few other things in here. Maybe duplicate that a few times. So the style editor, you come over here and you've got different themes that you can choose from. The default is the flat blue. If you like everything the way it is, that's fine. You can customize this. I'm going to make my browser a little bit bigger so everybody can see it real well. So you can customize this, and there's different areas that you can do customizations. So in general, what you can do is look at how the page is laid out, then you can get into fonts, and this is kind of at a global or a general level. So maybe I want a drop shadow or a box. Maybe I don't want it centered. I want a background image. So this is quite useful. You can have the entire screen with an image, and then you could have your form on top of that. Right, and you can go and you can select the color of your buttons, the padding of the buttons, the border, the colors. So there's quite a bit that you can do here. And when you start to make changes, one of the things it does is it creates the CSS for you, right? So under the covers, it's implementing all that for you. But you can flip over to that if you want to kind of understand how CSS works in the product. So it's a good way to kind of learn. But the intent of the style editor is not to do things with CSS. The product's doing it for you. So that's pretty straightforward. Now let's I'm going to jump into this next topic of fonts. One of the things that I found is quite easy to do is if you don't like the default fonts, you can go ahead and you can add a font file. All right, and one of the things I've noticed with Volt is that you have to actually add the font file as opposed to reference it via URL. So I happen to have the font file out there. And oh, this one will work. So when I attach that, the system recognized the font file. One of the things that's interesting is when I come over here to edit and I show CSS, look what shows up at font face. All right, so internally, just the fact that I attached that file established the fact that that font is now available. All right, it did that at font face for me. So what I can do is come over here to let's say general fonts, and let's just say across the board I want this Gotham book, so it shows up on the list. All right, so that makes it really easy to change fonts. And if you've been in some of the earlier sessions, we actually did this with the step-by-step tutorial, so that's probably just a review for you. And then when you preview this beautiful piece of work here, you can see the font is there across the board. Of course, you can mix the fonts too. So if you want two different fonts, one for one area of the application, another for another area, you can do that as well. But let's continue on with this topic because we're going to get in deep and thick as we go. So this is essentially what I did. You attach a file and it makes it available, and you can then use it with the style editor. Let's talk about documented and undocumented classes. All right, so every application has got the default CSS associated with the theme that you select, and what you can do is make changes. All right, so there's a section of the documentation that gets into this. Let me go back over to the browser. We'll make this big. If I make it big, I'll lose my tabs. And that section of the documentation gets into, first it gives you some examples, creating customized CSS, gives you some examples, and then it gets into the different class names. And it starts with classes in the view, and then at the form, and then gets into, okay, for a field, the label, the hint, the invalid. So you can see all the class names are documented here. I shouldn't say all of them, a lot of them are documented here. And then we go on to sections, to survey widgets, tab folders, buttons. So, one of the keys with CSS is you need to understand how to get a handle on what you want to style, and you do that through a class. All right, so these are all documented and they're available to you. So when you have those documented classes, I'm not going to save this beautiful piece of work here. When you have those documented classes, what you can do is completely change the look of the application. So here's just a simple learning example. These are single line fields. They look very different than the out of the box single line fields. How did I do that? Well, we'll go to this application. We'll open it up. And what I've done here is I've put my CSS in line for no other reason than you can see it. Ideally, what you want to do is just stick all this in a file, and then you'd attach the file in settings, and then you come over to the styles sheet, and then you could associate the file with the application. But it's in line. You can do it either way. So you can see the style tags there, top and bottom of this. But what I'm doing is I'm grabbing these different classes. And some of these you're not going to find, actually, some of these you're not going to find in the reference documentation that I just showed you. And I'm tweaking them a little bit, so for instance, for the placeholder, I'm giving it a margin, some padding, I'm making it black. The font color black for the placeholder, and the font size 16. Now, a good way to work with CSS in your application and style it is in your browser. And I do most of my development in Chrome, but I find that Firefox is actually better when it comes to tweaking style. So here's the same application, right? And your friends are this inspector and this style editor. So the CSS that I was just showing you is right here. So it's showing all the CSS that's associated with this application. The rest of the CSS is all coming from Volt itself, but this is the inline that I added, and it's just showing up here nicely. So what I could do is I can change this. So if I wanted to say that this is 18, it makes it 18. So you can tweak it here and then decide how you want it to look. And then when you're ready, you can just simply copy and paste it into a file or in line with your application. All right. And if you're looking at how to get a handle, what is the class name of the item you want? Well, then just inspect the element and you see your inspector come up, and it gives you all the different pieces here, and you can play with it here, and then you can come over to the style editor and add a style there, and then put that into your application. All right, so it's fun. It can be a little bit of work at first, but after a while, you kind of get the handle of it, and you can style just about anything in the application the way you want, letting your imagination go wild with CSS. All right, so that's documented classes. Let's go back to the presentation here. So we talked about documented classes. I talked about when in doubt, use the inspector and the style editor in your browser, right? And my favorite is in Firefox for doing the sort of styling. Let's talk about custom classes, right? Because these are fun. You may have noticed that just about every item in your application is got in its properties custom CSS class names, right? You can add a single CSS class name, custom CSS class name. You can add multiple. So in this example, I've got 4 of them. And then to the right, I've got my CSS. So I've defined 4 different classes, one called orange, one called purple, one called bold, one called big, right? Let's take a look at these in the app. This is another one of those apps that I created and sent off to you. All right, so we'll launch this. And here we see this is purple. This is orange. Let's go over here to Firefox and open this up. So we can see the CSS better in action. Oh, it's telling me I need to log in, which is fine. So here's the custom classes that are in there. So I added them in line in this application. So what's interesting is this field. So if I come over here in the app, this field, this single line text item, in the properties, you see placeholder, I'm sorry, under advanced, you see orange, bold, big, purple, right? So the first point is that you can add multiple classes. The second point is that you can add specificity to the class. So in this case, I tagged it orange, but I'm saying I only want the text box orange. And it's tagged purple, but I only want the form label purple. All right, so you come over here, you can see this is orange, that's purple. All right, so the second point here is your custom class can be appended with documented class information to make it specific, right? Perhaps I want to zero in on the invalid message in this single line item, you know, so I could specify that as well. So you've got that ability, and that's one of the tricks of CSS is you don't want to apply things too globally. You want to apply them, you know, as specifically as needed. You know, in some cases you probably do want a global, but in this case, you know, I can start playing with what is the background color of the digitext box. I could actually put a picture in the digitext box. I could get rid of the you know, the outside, and I'm doing this through custom classes, and because you've got these sort of you know, ability to just put them in here, it just makes it so easy to do. So that's a little bit on custom classes. All right, let's go to the next topic, which is, you know about custom classes. I'm going to talk about first a JavaScript function, which is called add classes and remove classes. All right, and the scenario here that I gave you, I'm going to show is I'm building some navigation. So I've got a menu on the left-hand side of the app, and everything in the menu is styled initially, and then what I'm doing is on click, I'm styling the item that you click so that the text is white and the background is dark. So that, you know, gives you an indication that that's what I selected. It's cool behavior, right? So the class menu click is just simply nothing more than background color and then color, which changes the text, right? So in the app, and you can see that there's 4 selections, there's 4 lines, right? So one is going to be add, the rest are going to be remove, right? And the beauty is you can copy and paste this into each one of the on-click events for these 4 choices, and just set the one that needs to be add to add, and then set the rest to remove. All right, so we'll take a look at this in action. We'll go over to the app, and this is yeah, I believe that's it is. So we'll first take a look at it running. So the idea here is they're all styled initially. There's an on page on show, which actually sets this to the white text in dark background. But then when I click on these, I'm adding that class to that text, right? And the other thing you notice is that I'm seeing different things to the right. We'll get to that in a minute. So there's actually a lot of cool stuff in this app, and it has a font attached, so it's using Bookman. So this is an interesting technique for navigation, and I've used this in different apps. The request leave app that you see in the sample apps uses this technique, and you can use it across the side, across the top, or down the side, and it's fairly clean, simple to implement. So let's go take a look at the application. So again, I put my CSS inline. So there's really only 2 classes here. There's a menu class and then a menu click. All right, so how does this work? Well, here are the items. So this is a section, right? So each text item has a couple in the dark text. And then the on-click event for each one of these, you can see the add class, menu click. So menu click is the light text on dark background. So add and then remove, right? And we'll get to these set visible things in a minute here. So as I click on each one of these, I'm just changing which one has that class. So add the class here, remove it from the others. So you build these 4 lines of CSS here once, and then you paste it into all of them, and then you just change the, you know, who gets added and who are removed, right? So that's really all that's to that. So if you look at the CSS, you know, it's largely just background color, And then the color of the text here, we're changing to white. So the default background, the default text color is black. We're just changing the background color to this light gray. The other thing I'm doing here is I'm changing the margin of the text item just a little bit. I'm decrementing it so that these things are kind of flush together. You can see a little white line there, but I perfected it, and 8 pixels makes it look real nice. And then I've also got a line of CSS in here that says cursor pointer. So what that does is you see the little hand that tells you that I can actually click on that text item. All right, so little CSS, but it goes a long way. All right, so let's talk about the next piece of this application, sections. All right, so in this example that I have on the screen here, I've got 3 choices, and when I click on that choice, what I'm doing is I'm deciding what to show. All right, so the way I've got the information on the right, I've got an overall container. All right, so that's one section, and then inside these sections, I've got 3 other sections. So a home section, choice A, choice B, and when you click, it says which ones to show, which ones to, it comes down to which one is true, which ones are false based on the selection. So fairly simple to implement. And another key here too is on the page show, you want something in the menu to be highlighted and you want something to be shown on the right. So on the page show, you set something, to show and be highlighted. So if you go back to the app, each one of these on clicks, here is the, set visible, all right? So set visible true and false is something I use all the time in my applications. I put it in on-click events in JavaScript code. So there it is in the on-click, and then on the page on show, you can see how I set this up. So I just add the menu click, the light text dark background to the home section on the navigation. And then I set the home section in the container to be true. And one of the things that you may notice about the application is that things vertically collapse when they're in a container. So if you show something and hide the rest, it creates the illusion that everything is in place, right? Another point I would make about sections is if you do not have a border showing, it doesn't take up any extra space. There's no margin. So you can add a lot of sections without giving up any real estate. Just turn the border off. In some cases, the border looks decorative and it's worth having. Now, there's a few other things in this application. I mentioned the fact that there's the font file there. I also have a picture, and this picture here, one of the things you might notice about the image items, so this is an image item, and if I come in here, the width is set to an absolute amount. You can't set an image to a percentage, but if you put the image in a text item, you can. So if I select choice B here and then grab this down, you can see that that's shrinking, right? It's always going to take 90%. So in a lot of cases, I put my images in text items because I have more control over the size of them. And you can combine them with text as well. So that's something else that's in this app. It's kind of a classic pattern. Welcome to the app, and let me ask you a bunch of questions. And of course, I'll have to put in some data, and I'm not going to bore you with typing stuff. So let's just put in some stuff. We go through the app, and we finally get to a review and submit piece of the app. So here's everything you have. Hopefully you agree. This is a regular button. and this button will submit the app, all right? So why use a regular button instead of an action button? Well, the reason is because you can put it anywhere you want. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be a button, all right? So we talked about text items for images and the fact that they can be responsive. Let's talk about using a button instead of an action button. And again, so you can put it anywhere you want. There's really two pieces of code that you need. All right, and the first one is on the form on show action buttons event. And what this does is essentially just loops through all the action buttons that you have in your app. And then based on the one that you specify, in this case, I'm saying s_submit, which is the default submit button when you build an application for the initiator phase or stage. And it loops through, it gets the submit button and it says hide it. Now you're probably thinking, why on earth would I do that? Why would I go get the submit button and hide it? Well, I need to programmatically refer to the submit button, and it doesn't exist if it was never on the page. So the fact that I present the page and then do this means that it's now an object that I can work with, right? But you never see it. It's there for like a nanosecond, then it's gone, right? If I went to the page properties and said do not show action buttons, it's not an object that I can deal with programmatically, right? So it's kind of a crazy concept, but I just need to get it and hide it, and now it's available programmatically. And then because it's available programmatically, what I can do is on the button on click, I can execute it. So this is the same code, go get it, but instead of hide it, activate it. All right, so this is, I wanted to package this up in an application so you can have a reference to go back to. You can see here in the action button, the on click, that code, right? And then on the form on show action buttons, you can see that code there. So those are the two pieces. Once you've got a reference to go to and copy and paste this, it's real easy to do. And the other interesting thing is it doesn't necessarily have to be an action button. It could be a piece of text, because with a piece of text, you can click that as well. Could be a picture, could be anything you want. So it gives you more flexibility in how you want to present the submit button. And in this case, I want to reveal it on this last panel. All right, so that's a little bit on navigation. So you see, I'm combining. It's not just about CSS. This is about design techniques. I'm building something which does not necessarily look like a form. It looks like a web app, and it's all on this one page that I created. So that was with navigation on the side. I took the same application and I just moved the sections and put it across the top. And guess what? It works pretty much the same. Kind of reminds me of tab folders, which I suppose you could also use, as kind of a design, approach. But that's across the top. So if we look at that application, literally the same thing. It's just that section is, I dragged it and dropped it on top and stretched out the containers section, so it's across the entire page. All right. So let's go back to my outline here. So we talked about that. Oh, yeah. And then there's this whole world of HTML. So if you really want to go wild with the look of your app, you can add HTML fragments. So kind of building in the direction that we were on, I'll show you the app first and we'll come back to this chart. Here it is. So this app the same app, but instead of text and sections, this is an HTML fragment. And it's responsive, so works nice this way as well. Where did I get this code? I Googled slide navigation HTML. Let's move on. All right. Let's talk about, so what I've shown you so far is putting some navigation and showing hiding sections. I'm building everything out on one page, which I like to do. But you can also take a different approach because you can have multiple pages, you can have multiple forms in your app. All right, so you could always architect your app to take advantage of forms and pages. And you can mix and match these too. So you could have one page in the app which has got this navigation within itself, and then it's part of a bigger application that's got multiple forms, checklists, etc. So navigating from form to form, each form has its own URL. Well, actually, more precisely, each application has its own URL with a form parameter. So when you open up an application, you notice that there's always that question mark and then form equals. So you have multiple forms. What you're doing is just the URL parameter is changing, but the other elements of the URL, which are the domain, the app ID, there's some other things in there, but the domain and the app ID in the form are the things that are going to change. All right. So what you want to do is, for the experience, you want to open it in place. Well, how do you do that? Well, you can do that with links, where links are open in place. You can also do it with JavaScript. But one of the things that you need to be mindful of when you're building form-to-form navigation is the URL. I always like to build an application so that if you duplicated it, or if you put it on a different domain, it would work. Put it on a different domain, the URL's changing. If you duplicate it, it's got a different application ID. So you need to, get the information, in terms of the domain and the application ID, and dynamically build the link or the URL that you're using JavaScript to do that navigation. All right. So this is kind of the state of where we're at with form-to-form navigation in the product. It's one area that I'm pushing for. It just needs to be much simpler and easier to do. But I'll give you the techniques here. Now, page-to-page navigation is quite simple. All right, here there's a JavaScript function that you should probably learn by heart. Form select page, then you pick the page. That's it. Or you use the navigation item off the palette. All right. So let's go to the example that I had sent along. Form and page navigation, that must be it. All right, so I've got a page. This is my, or I've got a form. Maybe what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you first the outline of the application so you can understand how we're navigating around. All right, so on the right here, we've got menu, form 1, form 2. Form 1 has got 3 different pages. All right, so let's go look at it in action. So this is menu. Here's a button, go to form 1. Now I'm in form 1. I'm on form 1, page 1. I can go back. Let's go back to form 1. Let's go to page 3 in form 1. Well, that's page 3. I can use the navigation to go back sequentially. And of course, that's the limitation of the navigation buttons. You can only go in sequence. If I want to go to 3 to 1, I've got to use this form select page to go there. right? So that's a button. I could also use a text item. So in this case, clicking on the text and executing this form select page. I've also added a custom class so that the cursor is a pointer, right? So that kind of gives you a visual clue that this is a navigation item, right? And then I can go next page here, and this is just the form select page, right? So when it's all working, it looks great. We'll go back to the main menu. The next example here I have is, this is HTML. So this is an image tag with a link set to it. Right, and I click this. Let's go in there. This is also HTML, right? So this is an A tag with an href in it, and it's going back. Right, and then this is an example of, this is just a text item. So this is static text with the URL hard coded into it. Right, and if you're not worried about the domain or the app ID changing, that's fine. It's really easy to set up. But again, going back to this thought of being mindful of the potential for the domain or the app ID to change, how do you deal with that? So let's take a look at the code behind this fragment. And you notice that I didn't type the code right into the fragment. What I'm doing is, on the on show, I've got some logic that's going on. I'm saying get the UID for the app. And one of the things that's interesting I found with Domino Vault is I don't even need to put the domain in. So the URL that I'm putting in here, it's starting with the /volt.apps, volt/apps. So what I'm doing is I'm getting the app ID, and then I'm building the URL. So the URL is volt-app/secure, so that's going to be a constant in all cases. And then I'm getting the app ID, and then I'm doing this here. To change this to form 1 or menu, I simply change the 2 to 1 or change form to menu, depending on whatever the names of your forms are. And then the rest here is item set content. So I'm setting the content of that fragment dynamically. All right, so that way it builds it dynamically, and it will work if I duplicated this and gave it to you and you had a different application ID in your app. So I use that technique in multiple places. Here, this is an HTML fragment to get back. Instead of dealing with an image, it's a little simpler. It's just it's an A tag, the font size 16, and here's the URL, and that's the text that I'm displaying, back. But I mean, this is kind of a technique that I've kind of settled on that works well. If you want to get away from just pure buttons and hard-coded URLs. All right, so let's go back to the charts. Yeah, so we talked about that, and that pretty much concludes everything I wanted to show you. I did add a chart in the deck this morning just on the resources, and I'll briefly go through those because I have the pages open in my browser. We saw in the documentation itself some information on CSS and styling. In the Domino Vault wiki, there are some examples, not a ton. We'll add to these. One that I put in here that I find useful is right justifying numbers. How do you do that? Well, just create the custom class number. In this case, we're qualifying it to the text box and align it right. Right, and then you just add the custom class, and your numbers align right. Right. So there's a few in there, and then the sample apps themselves. If you go to the Domino Vault forum in the support site, you'll see these sample apps. These are pinned to the top. And I make use of many of these CSS techniques in these applications. The request one in particular uses the navigation style that I showed you. All right, so with that, I think we'll stop there and turn it over to questions.